Howdy, and welcome to another video. I haven't recorded the video in like several weeks or even months, so this feels a little unnatural. I miss my chat, I miss my streams, however, we are recording a very interesting video today. One from the YouTuber Caspian Report. Do you remember him? We did a few things with him. One video he had about Mexico that was pretty interesting. Today he did one about Iran, and I think it's going to be really interesting. It's about Iran, even if it's headed to its next revolution. And I personally think there's a lot of stuff going on in Iran since the death of this woman. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. I don't know how to pronounce it. However, it was quite big, and I think it deserves to be big. And I think Iran deserves attention from the international community. We need to pay attention to those regimes that just don't care about human rights, and let's inform ourselves with this, what I think amazing video from this YouTuber. So if you guys are ready, and again, sorry if it looks a little weird, but I'm just trying new things. I'm testing, so don't worry about that. I have two computers now, so I want to see which one has the better choice. But if you notice it, if you notice the quality in change, or if you think it's worse, definitely give me a mention, a call, and I'll definitely fix it for you. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Let's absolutely go.
This is raw footage of protests outside Tabriz. Here is another showing the situation in Tehran, and one more from Mashhad. Iran is going through sporadic nationwide unrest. Many led by young women burning their headscarves and cutting their hair
I think, a great
protest
thing
the
to see,
mandatory
that
hijab.
so many women are protesting this injustice about Iran, about their country, right? The fact that a woman dies in the hands of the police. I think the police brutally, I don't want to say much, but brutally beat the woman that died. And it's good that they're protesting. I'm actually pretty happy about that. Not happy about the
Job
situation,
regulations.
Of course, just
Iranians are
horrible.
fed up with the morality police, the clerical establishment, and even the supreme leader himself. More than 80 cities have seen large-scale protests.
80.
Dozens are dead, and
insane.
hundreds are injured and detained. Iran hasn't seen this level of unrest since 2009, when the Green Movement shook the foundations of the state. The difference this time is that the country is experiencing a multitude of crises simultaneously, including grievances over social restrictions, rising food and energy prices, crippling inflation.
Sometimes us in the West have it very easy when it comes to democracy, at least, and even I'm including my own country in the West, but it's still a democratic country, right? We don't have religion imposed to us, and I think that's something to be mindful and even grateful about, that we don't have this situation.
Inflation
No
and
religious police,
economic
right?
collapse.
That's such an
Still
abstract
worse,
concept.
Iranians are going out on the streets at a time when the 83-year-old Supreme Ayatollah is
83.
rumored to be ailing. And while the Islamic Republic is not yet
Yeah, just imagine yourself having to deal with all of those protests. Like, damn, I'd be sick too,
yet ready to fall, it has inadvertently stepped with one foot
Yeah,
into
it's
its
not
grave.
gonna fall. He's gonna go down swinging like all leaders like this, all dictators, pretty much. 83, that's quite old, and
Today's video was sponsored by Established Titles, a project that
Shouldn't
helps
be that
preserve the
stressed when
woodlands
you
of
are 83,
Scotland
that's
while
for sure.
supporting global afforestation. Established Titles teams up with international charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future, and commits
I
to
don't
planting a
understand
tree for every order. The
this
neat part is
sponsor,
that
dude. I'd like to
Established
leave the
Titles
sponsor
is
now
based
because,
on a historic Scottish
this is a video
custom
we're
where
reacting to the
landowners are
creator.
referred to as lords
Man.
and ladies. So, by acquiring as little as 1 square feet of land, you can call yourself a lord or lady. That doesn't
Should I?
actually make you a member
Lord El Chopo, I think that'd be cool, to call myself a lord legally, which I think this is like
of any royal family, but you do get a certificate with a unique plot number that shows you the exact whereabouts of your land. Here is where my plot is located,
Oh,
and
he
if
actually
you use
has
my
one.
landing page, you will effectively have your land next to mine within a few minutes of walking. That's pretty cool. Not to mention, it makes for a great last-minute gift. Established Titles is actually running a special sale right now. Plus, if you use the code Caspian10, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/Caspian10 to get your gifts now and help support the channel. 40 years ago, the Islamic Revolution capsized social life in Iran. Religious laws took root, including a mandatory hijab mandate. Over the years, these Islamic customs have seen nearly no change, even under reformist governments. And yet, since the moment of its foundation, the Iranian public...
I don't think you can be called reformists if you don't have reforms, you know? But hey, you know, I don't know much about the government in Iran and how it actually works.
Public has expressed its resentment of theocracy and religious dogma. In recent years, however, protests against compulsory religious mandates have accelerated. The current unrest erupted in northwestern Iran at the funeral of Mahsa Amini, who was beaten into a coma by the morality police and then died. Her crime, violating the hijab dress code. Outraged, thousands of Iranians took to the streets and set off a wave of civil disobedience. From there, demonstrations spread.
I mean, God, just imagine just you wearing your religious dress not correctly, and then you get beaten to death by the police. Maybe their intention was not to kill her, but either way, it's just a very disturbing fact that, I mean, reminds me a little bit to the George Floyd situation. While I understand this is more religious, that was more social, it's still, I don't know, it's pretty, man.
Spread to all corners of the country. Mass protests are observed in Tehran, Mashhad, Tabriz, Isfahan, Sanandaj, Kerman, Zanjan, Ahvaz, and so on. More stunningly, in some cities, demonstrators burned images of Khamenei and attacked Iranian law enforcement services with firearms and
Imagine if this
weapons.
happened in North Korea.
Things haven't been this tense in a long while. That said, the Iranian state is not facing an imminent collapse. The current demonstrations lack organization and political representation. Plus, the government retains enough coercive capabilities to put down the unrest. Tehran will not collapse anytime soon, but in Iran, frustrations are plenty and they tend to coalesce whenever there is a crisis. Ethnic minorities hold grievances against Tehran due to political disenfranchisement, including the Kurdistan province where Amini was from. Meanwhile, with inflation at 52%.
So yeah, maybe you could have even a little bit of a racial thing there. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But again, she was Kurdish, not
in August 2022, Iranians have watched their banknotes buy less and less for years on end. Basic items, including food and medicine, have become unaffordable for many Iranians. And even though the Iranian leadership has promised salvation, international sanctions are still up, and the nuclear deal is still missing. Iran's GDP dropped from $644 billion in 2012 to $231 billion in 2020.
Wow, 250 billion for a country that massive. I mean, that's a loss of like what, $300 billion? It dropped more than half. Jesus Christ, it's more, I think. Wow, that's huge. Think about that. For a country that's, you know, Iran is big, and, you know, it's not like one of the biggest, but it has like what, 80 million people, 60 million people. I know the numbers are somewhere in that range. And the fact that they dropped so much GDP. Imagine you as a citizen losing so much wealth. It's absolutely catastrophic, and it makes me sad. You know, it should make you sad.
As a result, living standards in Iran have reached their lowest point in more than a century.
And again, this is from 2020. You have, of course, that pandemic that happened, and it's still going on. But maybe imagine today, maybe even dropped
Outrage and resentment are thus endemic, and the more resources Tehran pours into suppressing the unrest, the more vulnerable it gets in places elsewhere. So far, the government has tried to maintain control over the flow of information by restricting access to internet connectivity, telecommunications, and social media platforms. These efforts have isolated the protests into smaller.
I mean, most of us use like a VPN, right, to, watch movies or shows from other countries, stuff like that. But people in countries like Iran have to use a VPN to just access the internet regularly, without the government surveying you, having surveillance. I don't know. It's just so sad.
Pockets, preventing organization and keeping the demonstrations from snowballing into a full-fledged uprising. Meanwhile, to shield himself from further criticism, President Raisi and his allies have spoken about the need for investigations into the morality police. So, to placate the protesters, some reshuffling of personnel is likely, but at its core, no change will come to the functions and powers of religious law enforcement. And frankly, Iran can't turn its back on absolute rule. As a mountainous nation, Iran was historically ruled in much the same way as the Holy Roman Empire, a deeply divided realm with self-governing regions. Federalism.
Again, historically, Iran has always been a part of major empires, more recently Persia, and now we know it as Iran, but even back in the day, there were many, many huge empires that have conquered that part, that connection that unites the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. So it's it's an important place, and it's a privileged place that what so many empires have decided it. But just helpful understanding this from the historical perspective.
Defined historical Iranian states. However, in the early 20th century, Iran shifted to a centralized form of governance. This transition was brought about violently and suddenly, accompanied by a dose of repression. You can't have a revolution in white gloves after all. The Shah's dictatorship eventually ended, only to be replaced by a religious dictatorship. Since then, the Shia faith has kept the Iranian identity intact. Without it, Iran and its self-aware ethnic regions...
I'm wondering, what do you guys think about stuff like sanctions? Because, Iran could be considered a threat to the world, but like places like Cuba, for example, the sanctions really hit hard on the people of the country. So do you think that we should place more sanctions on Iran in order to put pressure on the government and maybe hope that will break them? Or should we not, to not affect the people as much, however, knowing that the government would be stronger? I don't know. What's your guys' position on sanctions?
Regions would drift apart. For the Iranian clerics, this means they view any social reform as a step towards decentralized power. So, for Iran to exist in its present form, it will consistently need a dose of either theocracy or autocracy. And yet, the Iranian state and the public have totally different views on the role the government should play. More Iranians than ever have access to outside information, and most have never lived in a state that wasn't governed by strict religious codes. Iranians know they're missing.
And I think that's what's, talking again about North Korea, what makes them even a little bit clever. Not to praise them or anything, because they are probably the worst country in the world to be born in. But they have to hide what's outside North Korea, because if you're in Iran and you see how the West or even other places in Central Asia and the Middle East have democracy, you're like, well, why would I want an autocratic regime when I could have democracy like people in the West? And I think that's what the Iranian government is probably most scared about.
Out. So even after the current unrest subsides, public frustrations will again pour out into the streets. Waves of sporadic unrest will keep hitting Iran again and again. But while the protests present an imminent threat to the Iranian state, the succession of the 83-year-old supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei presents a more deliberate crisis, one that could haunt the very legitimacy of the state. Having succeeded Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989, Khamenei is now the longest ruling leader in the Middle East. His eventual death would bring about dramatic change in the periphery. Intricate power plays are already taking shape in Tehran. Potential contenders and even 11th hour candidates are vying for power.
That's what we need, but in Russia. We need a bunch of candidates in Russia that want to become the next president or leader or whatever Vladimir Putin is. But yeah, talking about Iran, I guess it's good, but we need some change. I don't care who
Further
makes
convoluting
that
the
change.
succession process is the Iranian deep state. That sounds like an ominous thing, but a deep state usually refers to long-embedded civil servants whose loyalty and longevity go beyond the executive office. In Iran, the deep state is a complex web of civil servants who affect all aspects of political life, including its judiciary system, security architecture, intelligence apparatus, and business conglomerates. These civil servants are brought together by a shared philosophical creed and beliefs. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC for short, represents the main body of the Iranian deep state.
Yeah, and I think we saw this on Kraut's video. If you haven't watched that, you can go check the Kraut stream. But we saw the video he did on Iran, and he showed the sons or the daughters of many politicians, and they were in the West wearing like Western clothing, very like even provocative, right? And supposedly that goes against the Islamic rules of these politicians, right? So while they are at home bothering everyone with their strict rules, their children are outside spending a bunch of money that's from the people, and they are wearing like Western clothing. They are not respecting the religion or the supposed beliefs of their country, their families. So I don't know, pretty hypocritical when you really see their children.
One of their tasks is to combat infiltration within the political establishment. For instance, when reformist President Khatami wanted to liberalize some aspects of daily Iranian life, the IRGC took that as a threat akin to the glasnost and perestroika reforms in the Soviet Union. As such, the IRGC undermined Khatami's presidency by covert means. The same playbook was used again in 2009 to suppress the Green Movement and place its leader Musafi under house arrest. This is why the Tehran leadership is unwilling and frankly unable to reconsider its mandatory hijab regulations. Even an inch of concession is feared to ignite an avalanche of crisis, much like the glasnost and perestroika did in the late 1980s.
I guess,
the IRGC, together with Khamenei's office, audits and supervises the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Defense Ministry, Intelligence Ministry.
He literally calls himself the supreme leader, dude. North Korea did it first, brother. Well, no, actually, no. I think Iran probably did it first. I don't know. So, yeah, you got Aerospace Force, Ground Forces, Counterintelligence, Security, and, just a bunch of the Navy, I think you get it.
Interior Ministry and Justice Ministry. Khamenei is the architect of the deep state, but the IRGC is so powerful that if Iran were not a theocratic dictatorship, it would likely be a military dictatorship. The paradox is that all of this has happened
all those
before.
people were related to the military in some way.
In 1921, Colonel Reza Khan turned to politics and became Iran's prime minister. Later, in 1925, he overthrew Ahmad Shah of the Qajar dynasty and established the Pahlavi dynasty. What followed was a centralized military dictatorship, which, decades later, was replaced by a centralized theocratic dictatorship. So in Iran, things can always go from bad to worse, even when it's unfathomable. While the state is incapable of reform, society is changing. Iranians are more aware of the outside world than previous generations. Much like during the Pahlavi era, the gap between the government and the
I imagine that's the case with young people too, with millennials, right, or people my age, which actually are Gen Zers. So, I think that's the people who protest the most, probably.
Will gradually grow until they can no longer cope in the same place. The sanctity of Khamenei and the ruling religious establishment is no more. The next Iranian revolution is unpacking. Brief bursts of civil disobedience will remain sporadic and localized. But over time, unfiltered resentment could turn into substantial anti-government demonstrations. Because those who make peaceful revolution...
If the government in Iran does something stupid besides what they already have done, I mean, they are really close to a breaking point. I personally don't think we're going to see something like a revolution particularly soon. However, I think it could very well turn into a revolution if the government, kill some protesters or do something crazy, right? I don't want to even mention it because it's going to sound absurd, but it's Iran. It could happen.
Impossible, make a violent revolution inevitable. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian.
Okay guys, so if you like this video, please like, share, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. Let me know if you like this video, if you like this content creator, so we can maybe do more reactions in the future. And don't forget to leave your suggestions in the comments, and I'll see you soon.